Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the very first edition of Authors Reading Aloud. My name is Catherine Maggie. I will be your hostess for probably the majority of these programs, and I'm so excited to kick off this series tonight with a book with which I happen to be quite familiar. It is one of which I am one of the authors, and that book is called Confluence, Harpers Ferry as Destiny. Confluence is a word that means usually rivers coming together, and we do have that situation in Harpers Ferry, but confluence as a title also means all the stories that are coming together in this one particular place, a series of stories that impact American history for many generations and continue to do so today, and we'll try to share some of those favorite selections that we put into this book with you this evening. I use the word we because, and this is a community effort, if I could just give a shout out of thanks to many of the organizations who helped promote the event that you're witnessing this evening. First and foremost, the Harpers Ferry Park Association, which has published the book. They are a nonprofit that supports educational programs in Harpers Ferry National Historical Park. And they have a wonderful little bookshop in Lower Town if you've ever had the chance to visit us. Unfortunately, it's been closed since March. If you're interested in purchasing the book this evening, I'll have a link for you in a moment. I know they'd appreciate that. We'd also like to thank the George Tyler Moore Center for the Study of the Civil War, the Washington County Free Library, American Battlefields Trust, Leroy Caverns and Leroy Valley Museum, the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area, Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District, Visit Jefferson County, West Virginia, River Riders, the Save Historic Antietam Foundation, and the West Virginia Golden Seal Magazine. There are many other organizations and individuals who helped us get the word out tonight about this program, and thank you so much to all of you. As I said, Confluence is about coming together, and this is a community effort. Not just to share one book with you, but to share Harpers Ferry and its wonderful stories. And with that, I think I will go ahead and introduce you to my co-author, Dennis Frye. Good evening, Dennis.
Hello, Catherine. Good evening.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. For those of you who don't know Dennis, Dennis Frye recently retired after serving 20 years as chief historian at Harpers Ferry National Historical Park, and he spent another dozen years as a supervisory park ranger at Harpers Ferry. For his trend-setting achievements in preservation, education, and interpretation, he earned the highest honor in his branch of the federal government, the Department of Interior's Distinguished Service Award, along with a career commendation in the esteemed Congressional Record and a meritorious citation by the West Virginia Senate. Dennis is the author of 11 books and 103 articles, and he has been published in every major Civil War periodical. Dennis is a lifelong resident of the Harpers Ferry area, where his family roots go back more than 250 years. I suppose I should introduce myself somewhat, which is always kind of an awkward thing to do. As I said, my name is Catherine Maggie. My background actually is in law. I spent about 17 years working in the criminal justice system, and then decided to go pursue a dream I kind of stepped away of, living in the mountains and studying history and writing stories. And I'm very fortunate for organizations like the Harpers Ferry Park Association that have allowed me to do just that. So without further ado, Dennis, do you have anything that you want to say before we get started?
First of all, congratulations to you. This is a very fine idea to feature authors and to really promote our local bookstores. Boy, they need a lot of help right now, not because people have lost interest in books. People are reading books now, especially, but it's tough when you can't actually get to the store. And so Our store at Harpers Ferry, which is a nonprofit organization that supports the national park, that provided me with, and my park, with tens and tens of thousands of dollars in support over the years that I was there. If you purchase this book this evening, you're helping not only that store, but you're helping the national park at Harpers Ferry. And so keep that in mind as you listen to our words. And that's the other thing I'd like to say. This is going to be a different type of program, in that it's not a visual program. It's not designed to visually stimulate you. Yes, you're going to see images on the screen, and some of these images, many of these images you'll recognize. But don't expect to see an image every 2 or 3 seconds, because this is not designed to get your eyes excited, but instead to get your ears excited. This is a program of words. It's a program about words. You know, when we read words, they sound a lot differently than we actually sound out those words when we speak those words. So tonight the focus is on kind of a lost art, reading aloud, actually hearing ourselves pronounce the words, say the words, and feel the power of those words. The poetry of those words. Even though this is prose, some of this will sound so poetic. And so what I'd really like for you to do this evening, Catherine and I wish, is really concentrate on these words. Think about these words when you hear them. Pause as you hear these words. Let these words sink into you. Let these words become a part of you. Let these words actually become part of your soul tonight. And if you do that, you'll feel the soul of Harpers Ferry, because Confluence is not a book about history. It's a book about stories, people telling stories. And we all know the most important thing that people really have are our feelings. And we hope tonight that you'll feel Harpers Ferry, feel its people and its past, and feel its stories by feeling these words.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Dennis. I think that's the perfect introduction, not just to tonight's program, but the focus of the entire series of programs that we're going to do. There is something just so magical I have always found in both speaking words aloud, speaking books aloud, or hearing them read to me aloud. So I'm so happy and excited to share this experience with so many of you tonight as well. So without further ado, let us start with our Confluence.
Our opening chapter is titled Terror's Tentacles. Terror's Tentacles. Here are the opening words of the book. Danger lurked outside the school. No one knew its presence.
A miserable Monday morning awaited Schoolmaster Lind Curry and his nearly 30 students as they awakened at their homes. A cold rain had fallen much of that October night in the mountains of western Maryland, chilling the Blue Ridge and the Potomac River Valley, dropping temperature in their one-room schoolhouse to a raw and cutting frost.
The road to the mountain school was narrow and steep, and its dirt pathway had transformed into sticky glue. Mud-caked shoes and boots printed the floorboards as the boys and girls arrived. Mr. Curry watched an assortment of pants and skirts scamper in through the door, stained with red clay ooze. Waterlogged wool coats and rubber ponchos doggedly dripped, creating their own metronome rhythm. Quite a Monday morning mess.
Lessons commenced eventually, once Mr. Curry deemed all warm and in comfort. It was time to learn, time to engage the education routine. The clock ticked toward 10 a.m. Then, hell detonated. Strangers burst through the door, rifles in every direction, terror in the school. A man darted toward the teacher. 2 revolvers bulged from his belt. A Bowie knife flashed from inside his coat. He brandished a Sharps rifle in his hand. He demanded possession of the schoolhouse. Hostages, captives, entrapped were the traumatized teacher and kids. What was happening?
What was happening? John Brown had just launched his war to end slavery. One of his first objectives, an isolated schoolhouse 1 mile north of the ferry in the mountains of Maryland. Brown didn't intend to seize a teacher and students and take them as hostage. They were incidental to his war, but they were taken, they were seized. They saw these armed men and they were terrified. Every American today can understand and feel the terror in a school. Brown really wanted the school as an advance outpost in his war. Here he would gather men, weapons, and supplies. But his real target was never a school. His real target, a knife in the heart of the slave kingdom. And Harpers Ferry was part of that kingdom.
By virtue of a deed of trust, the trustees will sell at public auction for cash in front of United States Hotel, Harpers Ferry, on Saturday, the 9th day of August, 1856, several valuable slaves, namely, a woman named Mary, aged about 22 years old, a girl named Mary, aged about 10 years, a boy named Howard, aged about 7 years, and a woman named Annette, aged about 28 years, with her child Lucy, about 3 years old. Sale to take place between 1 and 2 o'clock p.m.
Yes, yes. We sold slaves in Harpers Ferry. We sold enslaved human beings on the main street, Shenandoah Street, a street that many of you have walked. You have gone by the auction block. In addition to his mission to destroy slavery, Brown also selected Harpers Ferry because he required weapons for his war. The U.S. Armory and Arsenal at the ferry could provide these weapons. Established by President George Washington, nearly 600,000 rifles and muskets have been produced at the ferry in nearly 60 years. At its peak, the Armory employed over 400 men, employees of the federal government. We share this from our chapter entitled Making Might. The government had little difficulty recruiting a labor force to produce rifles and muskets, attracting skilled artisans famous for their stylistic versions of the famed Pennsylvania rifle. Dozens of craftsmen moved from Philadelphia and other regions of the Quaker state into quarters at Harpers Ferry, bringing with them their experience, talents, and skills to produce small arms for the defense of the United States. They traded their local gunsmith shops for the moniker of U.S. government employees, a rare breed in America at the turn of the 19th century. When the War Department introduced new methods or new machines or new regulations or new managers or new technology or anything new, employee resistance was a response. Even rules that forbid loitering or gambling or tardiness or consumption of alcohol on armory property garnered blowback. One armorer, dismissed for his foibles, became so distressed he assassinated the armory superintendent. Now, armory workers hailed their peer, executed for his crime, as a folk hero, extolling him as a blunt reminder to future generations of managers of what consequences may result from too much control. The Harpers Ferry Armory evolved, however, into a masterpiece of military rigor and order and advanced technology. John Hall perfected the concept of interchangeable parts at the ferry. The armory became its own marvel and even a tourist attraction.
We were introduced to all the mysteries in this wonderful assemblages of contrivances for death. We learned that a musket consists of 49 pieces, that the number of operations in completing one amount to 346. Yet, I have never been able to understand why it should not be constituted to create as well as to kill, and to make a sickle as well as a sword. How much more beneficially would these hundreds of workmen be employed if government devoted their labor to the manufacture of such unpicturesque instruments as hoes, spades, rakes, axes, pitchforks, plows, and reaping machines, and if the army, which is to wield the perilous weapons that are strewn in every direction, were transmuted under national patronage into cultivators of homesteads. But alas, the soldier is epic and the farmer only pastoral, and pageantry beats homeliness all the world over. Those were the words of one of the visitors, tourists to the armory, Brandsmeyer, first printed in Harper's New Monthly Magazine in 1857.
The armory was not the only marvel to grace Harpers Ferry. The arrival of the steam horse, an odd-looking machine in the 1830s, transformed the town and launched a revolution in transportation, a revolution throughout the world. This comes from our chapter entitled Motion Matters. Motion Matters. The B&O Railroad, as a nascent technology, created hundreds of new jobs, new occupations, new sounds. Engineer, conductor, brakeman, and porter suddenly had new dictionary meanings, along with fireman, the worker shoveling coal into a locomotive's boiler. Cars now referred to vehicles conveying coal or freight or passengers. The baggage master had a particular function, not only to receive, check, handle, and dispose of luggage, carefully asking its destination, but also to be perfectly good humor and civil to all, even when passengers are otherwise.
The steam engine whistle, never before heard in Harpers Ferry, began echoing off the mountains. One sharp blast indicated the engineer's readiness to begin and was the signal for the brakeman to release the brakes. Two sharp blasts in quick succession meant apply the brakes, and conductors and brakemen on hearing it must exert themselves vigorously, avoiding the loss of time caused by looking to see what was the matter. A continuous blast of the whistle signaled the approach of road crossings, stations, and curves. Since train schedules depended upon time, and no universal timekeeper existed in the United States when railroads commenced, nor could time be communicated easily, clock correctness became an imperative. Each passenger train conductor must inspect the clocks which he had opportunity to see. At the B&O's operating manual, he must notify the agents on every outward trip of their error, if any, and on his return to Baltimore report the state of each clock as he found it, by entering it with the date and his name in the ticket office. The manual required agents of stations to regulate their clocks in conformance with the master clock of Mount Clair Station in Baltimore, kept in conformity with the standard.
Our chapter, Motion Matters, not only discusses the revolution of the railroad, but also the arrival of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal and the bridges, the story of the famous bridges at Harpers Ferry. But here we have something that few consider, again from our chapter, Motion Matters. The railroads doomed John Brown. 3.5 hours via rail lines rushed U.S. Marines from Washington to near Harpers Ferry. That journey of 62 miles along the Potomac, some years before, required 3.5 days, not 3.5 hours. Unlike in remote and undeveloped Kansas, where Brown had ample time to plot, prod, and pluck the pro-slavery forces, his Ferry target was not isolated. Railroads east, west, and south connected the ferry to three corners of the compass. Travel from the Ohio River to the Chesapeake Bay, a journey that once demanded 15 days, now could be completed in 22 hours. Perhaps Brown's gravest strategic error was his failure to calculate the railroads into his Harpers Ferry formula. But Captain Brown knew there at the ferry the railroads offered him no advantage. They provided him no connection with the North. Since of no value, they simply could be ignored. Where Brown miscalculated, however, was the rapid response the railroads would provide to an aroused and enraged population. Nearly 500 civilian militia soldiers, riding the rails from nearby towns of Frederick and Martinsburg and from points afar at Winchester and Baltimore, arrived within hours of the alarm. The express use of the railroads by the military disrupted and foiled Brown's enterprise. Brown knew his war upon slavery would make history. He did not, however, anticipate this. For the first time in American history, railroads would enable a shockingly rapid response to a military crisis. From our chapter, Fury and Fire. No night in Harpers Ferry had been more miserable. 4 civilians dead, 9 militiamen wounded, 6 of John Brown's soldiers killed, 3 more wounded, 2 captured. 2 of Brown's sons dying on the cold brick floor of the Armory's fire engine house. 11 prominent citizens held hostage. More than 500 soldiers around town. What would the morrow bring? United States Marines. From our chapter, Slavery's Storm. Enraged and frightened Harpers Ferry citizens did not await the arrival of the Marines. They fought back, attacking Brown and his insurgents, as they were called, with fury. Some scenes were ugly, very ugly.
After Mr. Beckham, who was my grand uncle, was shot, I was much exasperated and started with Mr. George Chambers to the room where the man Thompson was confined, with the purpose of shooting him. We found several persons in the room and had leveled our guns at him when Mrs. Folk's sister threw herself before him and begged us to leave him to the laws. We then caught hold of him and dragged him out by the throat, he saying, "Though you may take my life, 80,000 will rise up to avenge me and carry out my purpose of giving liberty to the slaves." Well, we carried him out to the bridge, and 2 of us, leveling our guns in this moment of wild exasperation, fired. And before he fell, a dozen or more balls were buried in him. We then threw his body over the trestle work. We concluded to start after the others and shoot all we could find. I'd just seen my beloved uncle and best friend I'd ever had shot down by those villainous abolitionists, and I felt justified in shooting any that I could find. I felt it my duty, and I have no regrets. These are the words of Harry Hunter in his testimony at the John Brown trial in October 1859.
From our chapter, Fury and Fire. Edwin Coppig, one of John Brown's soldiers, was captured with Brown in the Armory fire engine house. He was sentenced to hang in Charlestown 2 weeks after the execution of Brown. The 24-year-old Quaker originally from Salem, Ohio, wrote this letter to his uncle from his jail cell just before his own execution on December 16, 1859. We share with you some extracts.
I seat myself by the stand to write for the first and last time to thee and thy family. Though far from home and overtaken by misfortune, I have not forgotten thee.
Thank God, the principles of the cause in which we are engaged will not die with me and my brave comrades. The cause of everlasting truth and justice will go on conquering, to conquer, until our broad and beautiful land shall rest beneath the banner of freedom.
I have hoped to live to see the dawn of that glorious day. I had hoped to live to see the principles of our Declaration of Independence fully realized. I had hoped to see the dark stain of slavery blotted from our land and the libel on our boasted freedom erased.
But this cannot be. I have heard my sentence passed. My doom is sealed. But 2 more short days remain for me to fulfill my earthly destiny, but 2 days between me and eternity. At the expiration of these 2 days, I shall stand upon the scaffold to take my last look at earthly scenes. But that scaffold has but little dread for me.
By the taking of my life and the lives of my comrades, Virginia is but hastening on that glorious day when the slave shall rejoice in his freedom, when he can say, I too am a man and am groaning no more under the yoke of oppression.
From our chapter, Fury and Fire. The fear of slave insurrection spread far beyond the confines of Harpers Ferry. Virginia is arming to the teeth, exclaimed former President John Tyler, himself a Virginian. More than 50,000 stands of arms already distributed, and the demand for more daily increasing. A volcanic anger erupted in the Old Dominion. All of Virginia will stand forth as one man and say to fanaticism, declared James L. Kemper before the General Assembly in Richmond, that whenever you advance a hostile foot upon our soil, we will welcome you with bloody hands and hospitable graves.
Hospitable graves did not honor the lives of John Brown's dead soldiers. Harpers Ferry authorities were at a loss. What disposition for the bodies of the insurgents? Sepulture in one of the village cemeteries was, in view of the excited state of the public mind, out of the question. The answer was to bury the bodies in a remote location in order that the place might be unknown or forgotten in a short time. Subsequently, 7 corpses of Brown's men were packed into 2 store boxes, carried across the Shenandoah Bridge in a freight wagon, and buried in a hole near the shore, 1/2 mile upriver in an unmarked grave, victims of a failed war.
From our chapter, War Wounds. War Wounds. George Washington never envisioned his beloved Potomac River as an international boundary within his own country. 6 decades after Washington's death, the land he liberated, the country he built, and the nation he led was at war with itself. The great-grandchildren of the parents of the American Revolution had broken the United States of America into the divided states. We have truly fallen upon evil times, cried George Mosey, as he watched the first flames of Civil War engulf his home industry in Harpers Ferry. Not a moment of Civil War would benefit Harpers Ferry. As war dawned, no one could measure its length. No one could predict its outcome. But one matter was certain. Harpers Ferry was in a precarious place. When Virginia seceded, an early prize for the fledgling Confederacy was capture of the U.S. Armory and Arsenal, just as it had been for John Brown. The future of the Armory fell into the hands of a young U.S. Army lieutenant, Roger Jones. From our chapter, War Wounds, here we have the words of Lieutenant Jones. Having become satisfied that an attempt would be made to seize the arsenal and workshops during the night, I made preparations for the destruction of the place, to be carried out only in the event of my being unable to defend it. I detailed 12 men in my company, ordered 6 of them to get their bed sacks, and we then filled those with straw and put a keg of powder in each one of them. Powder, incidentally, that had been seized from John Brown months before. I proceeded in person with this party from the armory to the arsenal buildings. I distributed these sacks with powder in them in the 2 arsenal buildings, and with the aid of shavings and bituminous coal, which I had previously carried in there, and with a quantity of lumber lying in the buildings, I prepared things so that a fire could be kindled in an instant. The Civil War generated countless war stories in Harpers Ferry. Trapped between the jaws of North and South, the ferry could not escape. Year after year, 1861, 1862, 63, 64, and 65, more than 1,400 days, Harpers Ferry struggled in a noose for survival. Here are some of her war stories.
Abba Goddard met the war. The matron from Maine accompanied a regiment from the down east state, first arriving at the ferry in the spring of 1862. Her job was to make the base hospital as comfortable as possible, and she busied herself seeking donated money and charity boxes from friends and families in Portland. She also made weekly trips into Baltimore, purchasing food for the hospital, including barrels of potatoes, onions, ginger cakes, boxes of lemons, and 100 pounds of codfish. Then occurred disaster. Confederates. Thousands of rebels under Stonewall Jackson surrounded the ferry in mid-September 1862 and commenced a blistering bombardment. Matron Goddard's hospital was not exempt. "They peppered us," she exclaimed. Undaunted, the brave woman ran toward, not away from unexploded, sizzling shells. "As fast as a shell fell, I picked it up. I would have volunteered gathering the entire crop had I supposed our gunners would have remailed them to the Confederates." Mrs. Goddard faced another emergency after the Confederates' forced U.S. capitulation. The rebels commenced rounding up hundreds of escaped refugee African Americans with intention of returning them to slavery. When the Confederates arrived at the matron's hospital, she refused to allow 7 of her most intimate Black companions to be seized. She greeted the Southern soldiers with her pistol. "I am almost tired of night watching, and my revolver begins to grow heavy," she lamented. "It holds but 5 balls, but before Secesh gets my 7 ebonies, my body will pay for the 2 balls wanting. Oh, this traffic in human flesh."
Charles Melton met the war. Young Charlie Moulton arrived with the 1st U.S. Regiment to enter Harpers Ferry following Gettysburg. The lad from Worcester, Massachusetts, entered town the 3rd week of July 1863 with the 34th Massachusetts Infantry, a brand new outfit just recruited. As Moulton stepped upon the sacred soil of enemy country for the first time, the majesty of Harpers Ferry's Mother Nature impressed him. He wrote splendid landscape scenery for the artist. but the destruction of man disgusted him. Moulton would state, "Now all is desolated and utter ruin. War has had its effect and laid everything waste and barren. The larger portion of the houses all lie in ruins. The entire place is not actually worth $10.
As an excellent scribe with precision penmanship, Moulton soon discovered himself detailed to the provost marshal, where he helped enforce martial law and order within the Harpers Ferry military district. The provost ruled with an iron hand and had absolute authority.
He determined your rights. No Bill of Rights in occupied Harpers Ferry. The provost was your jailer, your prosecutor, your judge, and if necessary, your executioner. His power controlled your existence. He owned you.
From his office on High Street, Corporal Moulton dealt with three types of violators: civilians, deserters, and soldiers. His daily work required that he administer loyalty oaths to the United States, of course, issue passes for travel, transport, and even for food, inspect all baggage, possessions, and deliveries for prohibited articles such as whiskey, process Confederate deserters and prisoners of war, and enact punishment upon U.S. soldiers for infractions of military rule, such as sleeping at post. The John Brown Fort became the favorite jail. In 1864, Margaret Kelly met the war.
The young lady was living on High Street with her family when the Confederates suddenly seized Harpers Ferry in July 1864. Rebel sharpshooters quickly posted themselves throughout the town, so annoying the Union commander atop Maryland Heights that he notified citizens to vacate houses as he would shell the town. Too late. With the railroad bridge destroyed, the pontoon bridge gone, there was no escape. The fireworks of this July 4th were deemed for death. And for 2 days, the village of Harpers Ferry had its worst experience of a bombardment. More civilians were killed or wounded within the ferry during this attack than any other moment of the war. An unknown woman was slain on High Street. An African-American woman who had ventured forth for water also was killed. Her lifeless body stranded on Shenandoah Street all day.
A shell penetrated the house of James McGraw on High Street, but passed directly through without harming anyone. Its momentum carried the dastardly intruder through a wall into the next door Kelly home, sizzling and sputtering, where it fell on a bed without exploding. Standing astride that bed was Miss Margaret. Would that bed ever again offer rest? There was a shell entered the house of Thomas Jenkins in Bolivar, recorded Mary Jane Griffith, another resident. It exploded in the room where his wife lay on the sofa. A piece of the shell pushed through one thigh and partly into the other. Her babe was lying in the crib. One of its hands was split open by a piece of shell. And her daughter, a young lady, was wounded in the side. Now just think of it.
From our chapter, Redeemers, Resistors. The Civil War ended American slavery, but it did not exterminate racism. The Civil War established freedom, but it eluded civil rights. The Civil War changed America, but most Americans did not change. Racial tension, racial strife have been America's longest lasting and most continuous disharmony. Relations between blacks and whites in the United States persistently have defied the cornerstone of the country's Declaration of Independence. Americans love the words, all men are created equal. Yet as a nation, we, the people, have failed to practice these 5 determinate words for most of America's existence. The struggle for equality has been endless. This epic engagement, this enlightenment for human dignity and human equality, embodies Harpers Ferry's story after the Civil War. Here is a scene in the ferry soon after the war ended from our chapter, Redeemers, Resistors.
Black refugees at Harpers Ferry faced horrific conditions following the Civil War. We have a colored population huddled together almost with nowhere to live and nothing to live on, despaired a relief missionary. As the number of congregated freedmen fluctuated between 500 and 700 people, more than double the town's pre-war African-American population, they encountered limited housing, exorbitant rents, makeshift shelters, a paucity of food and clothing, and omnipresent pestilence resulting in infant mortality.
A government inspector general, following a visit to the ferry, discovered blacks lived, quote, in a state of filth, disorder, and wretchedness. His discoveries defied existence. He writes, "The colored people live in filthy, overcrowded tenements, destitute of every convenience, insufficiently clad, often without food, idle. They are necessarily exposed to frequent attacks of disease." A Freedmen's Bureau officer labeled the ferry a nest of paupers and concluded that nothing but a revolution or something similar will change this state of affairs. A revolution? A revolution through education was forthcoming.
Indeed it was. That education revolution first took shape in the form of missionary teachers coming from the northern states into Harpers Ferry, into the Shenandoah Valley, throughout the South, to establish new schools for the newly emancipated population, a thing that had been illegal in many places just a few years earlier. As you can imagine, these teachers were not always met with open arms from the populations that they encountered. Here are some of the experiences that we recorded in our chapter on dealing with this issue and the rise of Storer College, which you see pictured here. Storer College would ultimately last for a number of decades, but here is one of our early teachers' experiences as we recorded in Confluence. Miss Sarah Jane Foster, one of 4 young missionary women who followed Brockett to Harpers Ferry as a teacher for the freedmen, discovered early in her tenure that an unmarried white woman escorted from school to her home by a black man violated Southern social codes. The indignation was immediate and threatening. "The roughs are terribly exasperated," Miss Foster shared in her diary. She was forced to abandon her white boarders' home for fear they might be mobbed. She and her school in Martinsburg, about 15 miles from the ferry, were so endangered by violence and vandalism that the Freedmen's Bureau rushed troops to the town to ensure order. "I am in trouble," she wrote. "I have been slandered by the mob. It cuts me deeply," trembled Foster. Taunted, tormented, and tested, missionary Foster turned to her faith. "God is at work here," she deemed. "Oh, Father, let me stay. I cannot give it up now." Missionary Ann Dudley suffered a similar experience in Charlestown, just 8 miles from the ferry. Escorted into town by federal soldiers, white boarding house operators refused her quarters, and her presence brought repeated sneers, jeers, and threats. The 32-year-old unmarried Dudley felt compelled to keep a good axe and six-shooter at the head of my bed at night, resolved to sell my life as dearly as possible if need be. She established her first school in a log cabin with a stone fireplace, moved in some rough board benches, and closed the shutters to hinder the chance to shoot at us at night, for we had night school and strongly barred the doors. As Miss Dudley so surmised, the spirit that hung John Brown still lives.
Harpers Ferry attempted to rebuild following the devastation of the Civil War, and that produced a chapter that we entitled Renaissance Repelled.
The year 1870 began with great joy.
It ended with a murderous flood.
2 autumn days in 1870 killed more Harpers Ferry residents than 4 years of Civil War. Those 2 days, in fact, remain as the deadliest days in Harpers Ferry's history.
It started innocently, as it always does, with rain. Precipitation commenced falling in the upper reaches of the Shenandoah Valley the last week of September 1870. An odd occurrence, actually, as the fall season often predicted a dry spell. And thus, a visitation from the heavens introduced a hurricane or tropical storm, or a nor'easter, as we call it, a weather anomaly that hugs the eastern coast. History does not record the type of the 1870 storm, but a pregnant cloud stalled over the Shenandoah Valley that last week of September, dumping prodigious buckets of rain into the valley's coffers.
Friday night, September 30th, arrived at the ferry with few concerns. The rain fell steadily, but not alarmingly. The Shenandoah was rising, but not much surprising. Then all changed. In the depth of darkness, as most were asleep, a strange sound awakened residents. A sudden roar, followed by a rattling of windows, a shaking of walls, an explosion of water. Flash flood.
As if a dam had burst, the angry Shenandoah rampaged violently. Trees were ripped from their roots and transformed into surging spears. The current, swift, powerful, dared anything to stand against its rage. And the dismal darkness, with no light to see, no illumination to guide, exacerbated the fear. Horror consumed Harpers Ferry.
The rapids rose 6 feet in 4 minutes, according to some reports. Residents on Virginia's Island and adjoining upstream islands were cut off and trapped by the impetuous torrent. During the darkened hours of Friday night and Saturday morning, helpless people remained in their awful prisons, with the billows surging around them. No chance of escape, and naught but death staring them in the face. One observer recalled how the spectral light of a young moon, wading through the heavy masses of cloud, gave a weird coloring to the frightful picture.
4 houses crashed in less than 5 minutes. Poor women and children were on the streets who had just escaped a watery grave, recalled one witness. Every few minutes, a low rumble would be heard, the startling signal that one of their once happy homes had sunk beneath the waters, perhaps containing loved kindred and friends whose dying wails could be heard on the midnight air.
Rescuers threw baskets tied to ropes in heroic attempts to save souls. But when the water receded, the drowning deaths were shocking. 42 killed. More than half the dead, 23, were African American, with the Bateman family wiped out, losing 18 men, women, and children. Many of the flood victims' bodies were never recovered.
From our chapter, History's Harness. From a future flood, a future is born. March 20, 1936. Promised to be an historic day in a town of historic events.
A citizens group from Harpers Ferry had chosen spring's inaugural to breathe life into a vision to transform Harpers Ferry into a National Park Service historic site. Preparations were made, the meeting was set, invitations were sent. An illustrated letter predicted a bright future.
But no meeting occurred. No plans were presented. Disaster nearly washed away the promise.
Just days before the March 20th meeting, torrential rains and melting snow transformed the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers into raging monsters. Lower Town Harpers Ferry sank beneath 36 feet of water, the highest flood in recorded history. Both highway bridges into town collapsed. Buildings were demolished. Debris piled high in the once busy streets.
Several days after the savage waters had subsided, United States Congressman Jennings Randolph of West Virginia's 2nd District and Henry McDonald, president of Harpers Ferry's Historic College, walked slowly through Harpers Ferry's muddy and flood-torn district. As the two men marveled at nature's destruction, both paused and recalled the town's rich and varied history.
We walked down near the river's edge on ground that had but a few days before been covered by the floodwaters. The mud was up to our ankle tops, and as we walked, waded would be a better word, through all that slush, I recall the words of Dr. McDonald. We ought to have a national park here. Then the challenge became evident. Harpers Ferry must be saved. Its history must be preserved. It must become a National Historic Site.
Soon after the first National Park Service rangers arrived in the mid-1950s, the park commenced planning for a big event, a gargantuan event, the John Brown Centennial in 1959. But the moment was fraught with national controversy. We deal with Harpers Ferry's role in the centennial, the Brown Centennial, and the commemoration of the Civil War period, 100 years later. After we entitled Spark Still Smolders. Here are the opening words of Spark Still Smolder. What do you do with John Brown? No, not John Brown's body, but John Brown's anniversary. How do you deal with a body that has stopped moldering, but whose soul is still smoldering? John Brown stabbed the United States government in 1859 over the issue of slavery. 100 years later, in 1959, in the midst of the Civil Rights Movement, the memory of Brown continued to prick federal policy and elicit fear within federal agencies. In 1859, John Brown's war raged over Harpers Ferry, and again in 1959. Few individuals in American history have generated as much controversy and scorching debate as the fiery abolitionist John Brown. His attack on the Harpers Ferry Armory and Arsenal in mid-October 1859 lasted but 34 hours. Yet the tornado spawned by his subsequent trial and execution for murder and treason and slave insurrection heaved upheaval into the consciousness of Americans for generations, now spanning 3 centuries. Americans do not deliberate John Brown. Instead, we feel his enduring legacy. We feel the fear of the Southerner. We feel the resolve of the Northerner. We feel the anger in Dixieland. We feel the triumph in New England. We feel the rage of a culture. we feel the freedom of a race. Saint or madman, murderer or liberator, devil or martyr, terrorist or freedom fighter. John Brown is not what we think, but what we feel. Well, the national park was established, and the national park has influenced Harpers Ferry's present day appearance and also its history. So we decided to prepare a chapter entitled Meaning's Master. 25 years after the John Brown Centennial, Harpers Ferry again discovered itself in the crosshairs of a national debate. Jefferson County, West Virginia, had become the fastest growing population county in West Virginia. Prime real estate surrounded Harpers Ferry and the national park. But the park boundary did not include much of Harpers Ferry's history. Much of Harpers Ferry's history was not protected. And thus the clash commenced. From Meaning's Master. All expected the Niagara Centennial of 2006 to shine as a sacred moment in Harpers Ferry Park's history. The commemoration of civil rights at its early stalwart leaders finally would receive the national recognition they deserve. Anticipation heightened as the park prepared to welcome scholars and performers and visitors from across the nation to celebrate the civil rights cornerstone laid at Harpers Ferry.
Then the Ku Klux Klan announced its intention to crash the party.
Yes, the Ku Klux Klan. Attending a civil rights commemoration. This clash of morality generated an army of U.S. Park Police that became an occupation force on the Storr College campus. A surreal mixture of blue helmets and riot gear, jumbled with soaring orations and gospel vocals, as the Klansmen and women, arrayed not in their customary white hoods and robes, but as civilians, roamed about the lectures and exhibits as a posturing, palpitating phalanx. The tension thermometer singed, but did not blow. And the event escaped confrontation.
Not the case 2 miles distant, where arrests were imminent.
Bulldozers and trench excavators were altering the earth on the Schoolhouse Ridge battlefield. At the same time, the KKK was stalking the Niagara event. You see, local developers intentionally, purposely, had selected Niagara weekend as the ideal moment for their surprise attack. They secretly had mobilized on government property late on a Friday night and boldly commenced excavation of water and sewer lines on national park property at dawn on Saturday. No way that the NPS could react.
Wrong.
The park's chief ranger responded to the emergency, racing to the battlefield with sirens blaring and lights flashing. Greeted that Saturday morning by 3 local attorneys on a Saturday morning. Why are they working? They promptly waved a paper right-of-way deed in her face, and they dared her, the chief ranger, to stop them. Not intimidated, the chief ranger informed the violators they had no permit, had no permission to dig up federal property belonging to the people of the United States. She ordered her rangers to seize all equipment and arrest all trespassers. Everything halted.
Then arrived a lawyer from Washington. For nearly 2 decades, titanic forces collided. Preservationists dueled with developers. National organizations combated local interests. Public rights wrestled with property rights. Open space opposed living space. The universal and unanswered questions would greed supplant the public need?
One unusual factor that helped tilt the wave locally toward preservation of Harpers Ferry was this. After the county commissioners stood upon Schoolhouse Ridge with the park historian and informed him, "Nothing happened here, boy," the park launched an aggressive school curriculum program to educate Jefferson County's youth, and it worked. The first commissioner's vote, 1989, on park expansion was unanimous, 5-0 against. A decade and a half later, after thousands upon thousands of students from Jefferson County had experienced the battlefield firsthand under the direction of park rangers and park educators, on another commissioner's vote, we have a 5-0 in favor of preserving the battlefield. Oh, the power of education. Well, we wanted to end our book with an inspiring and uplifting message for all readers. And again, our final chapter is entitled Meaning's Master. Meaning's Master. Here are our final words. Why preserve a national park?
What is the value of history?
What is the meaning of John Brown? What do we learn from the Civil War? What does the struggle for civil rights teach? What is the proper balance between new technologies and workers' jobs? What is our solution for racial tension?
Harpers Ferry offers us a place to discuss our differences, debate our opinions, and express our thoughts and voices. It epitomizes our American democracy. It characterizes our American evolution.
Yet for each of us, this question endures.
What constitutes transformative moments and places where our nation's trajectory changed so dramatically? It identifies who we are rather than who we were.
People at Harpers Ferry transformed us. People at Harpers Ferry preserved it for us. People in our future will determine Harpers Ferry's destiny or demise.
But this is certain.
Harpers Ferry is the power of place. Hear your souls, the soles of your feet. Connect with their souls and touch your soul within.
Few places possess such power. And that concludes our readings from our Confluence. We hope you've enjoyed this preview of this little book that we've put our hearts and souls into. If you are so moved, this is the direct link to the bookshop, the nonprofit bookshop, where you can purchase this and bring it home to hold in your own little library if you wish. I will also drop this information in the video description so you can find it perhaps a little more easily. And I think we will open it up now for questions. Thank you so much, Dennis. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's a wonderful book. And I don't say that because we have the privilege, and it is a privilege, of researching it and writing it, but because these stories, there's so many good stories. And we tried to tell stories that are unfamiliar stories. A lot of people know a lot about Harpers Ferry. We didn't want our book to be what people knew. We tried to find what we didn't know. And so we have so many sources, primary sources that have not been published before, from diaries and letters and journals and newspaper articles that haven't been seen for 150 years. And really tells this story. And so for anyone who knows Harpers Ferry, this will help you know Harpers Ferry even better. In fact, I was surprised. I mean, I was chief historian at the national park for 20 years, and I thought I knew a lot about Harpers Ferry. I discovered during this project how much I didn't know.
Yes, I honestly had so much fun working on this book. Every day was just a celebration of finding new things and new photos, new images that hadn't been seen before, hadn't been seen in a very long time. The letters.
Yeah, literally discoveries, many, many new discoveries.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. One of the things I really love about Harpers Ferry is that there are just so many stories that pool together in this one place. And we've tried to give you a feel for some of them this evening, but there are many more inside this little book.
Yeah, it's really difficult to try to pick out just these words. There were so many subjects and topics and people that we could present to you, but they're in the book. And if you'd like to meet them, they're there awaiting you.
Yes. So actually some questions, somebody asked if there was anything about Dangerfield Newby in the book. Yes, you can read about Mr. Newby. He was one of John Brown's men, and his story, as well as the stories of several other of John Brown's soldiers, are included as well. So that is definitely something that
if you don't know who Dangerfield Newby is, I'm going to tell you right now.
Right. It's a mystery. You have to get the book to find out. Let's see here. So we have some comments from Jeff Evans, who is one of our Harpers Ferry certified park guides, who has been apparently fighting his internet signal to try and watch us this evening. Thank you, Jeff. We miss you in Harpers Ferry. Oh, this is a lovely compliment. Can't wait to come visit Harpers Ferry again. Your words are making it live for me again. And that is, I think, the most beautiful compliment that we could receive. If you've been able to feel anything of Harpers Ferry through these words tonight, my job is done. I love this place so much, and I will talk to anybody about it. If you give me 5 seconds, I'll take an hour. Let's see here. Okay, Dennis, here's a question that's pretty interesting. You mentioned the power of education, and you're talking about the preservation battles. Why are the powers to be so trying to diminish the Civil War in our high school classrooms? Do you feel that Civil War education has become less than what it used to be in high school?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of things have changed in teaching, and much has changed in the teaching of history. I do not envy a history teacher, whether they're in a public school or a private school. I do not envy them. Teaching history is difficult. And one reason is there's too much history. There's too much. What do you select? It was just like us doing this book. What do we select? You can't tell everything, and you don't want to tell everything. You need to tell the important things. You need to really talk about things that change us, that transform us, that are relevant to the student. So the Civil War definitely has been diminished, and it concerns me. I think at this moment we have an overall diminished interest in the study of the American Civil War, but we've seen the Civil War boomerang. It comes back. It has one of these things that brings it back into the national consciousness every few years or every other decade, and I'm hopeful that this won't be the demise of the Civil War, this rather low point right now. I'm hoping we'll come back, that the interest will be regenerated. But yeah, it's a difficult issue. You know, a lot of people don't know that the Civil War happened after the Revolutionary War. I remember leading a tour once, a public tour, where a young woman came to me. This is in Harpers Ferry National Park with 2 young children, and I'm in Ranger uniform preparing to do the tour, and she kind of came close to me and whispered in my ear, "Could you remind me who came first, Lincoln or Washington?"
Wow. Wow. Sort of piggyback on that, one of the hats that I have worn in my life is history teacher. And I used to love starting my class with clips of Jay Leno's interviews on the street, asking people what should be basic American history questions. And my students would be shocked and appalled that so many adults did not know basic answers like that. Which war is George Washington involved in? And I hope that it would sort of motivate them to not grow up and become that way, to stay connected to it. But it certainly is a challenge as a former teacher. I wanted so badly to help my students connect with stories that would move them, that they could carry with them, that would inspire them in their own lives. And that's,
I'm sorry,
different for every student.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but it just reminds me that one reason we had so much success teaching history in the national park, and yes, park rangers are teachers, they're excellent teachers, is that we didn't teach chronology, and
neither did I.
We didn't teach dates, and we didn't teach facts. Yeah, that's what we generally think of as history, and because that's what we think of as history, that's why so many people, let's face it, hate history. Why do you want to know a bunch of dates? Why are you going to memorize a bunch of facts? It's useless to you. It means nothing. But if you can teach instead meaning and the value of people's decisions and how those decisions accumulate and affect you today, then history means something to you because you can relate to a decision. You can understand how people make decisions and the options that they faced and the struggle that they go forward to make that decision. And if you can teach history as a series of options and decisions, everybody can relate to that because that's who we are. We have options every day. We make decisions every day. We had a lot of success teaching history in our national park.
Yes, we have. And just another plug for the Harpers Ferry Park Association. We are actually publishing this weekend a little blog about the experiences of homeschooling, using national parks as a basis for homeschooling, history in particular, but there are a multitude of other subjects that you could bring into that. And this is another one of the hats that I've worn in my life, is a homeschooling mom. I had a child who was wildly passionate about history and was heartbroken when the curriculum was cut at her school. And that became the focus of our home education program. And I know that a lot of parents are trying to find ideas, trying to adjust to perhaps limited access to schooling as we deal with new pandemic-related regulations or a removal from schools altogether. So I hope that you'll check that out this weekend at the Harpers Ferry Park Association blog. Just some ideas from my adventure as a history teacher with a history-obsessed child. We actually spent about 6 months of our lives on the Civil War, traveling from one battlefield historic site to another. And so you can read about it.
I have an idea. During these times of the pandemic, parents purchased Confluence, and as we did, read stories.
Yeah.
Share these stories. Get the kids interested by sharing stories. If you're a good storyteller, you can make a kid enjoy history. That's the key. Tell a good story. Don't make it up, but tell a good story that's true, that happened, but make it a story. Kids love stories.
Yes, they do. And that's always been one of my theories as a parent as well as a teacher. So the challenge is on to see how that turns out, I suppose. Let me look at some of our other questions here. Hello, we have Loudon Heights, very far away, just across the river. Hello from Illinois. Hello from Cumberland, Maryland. Somebody has noted that yes, Dennis is coming back to read from another of his books on June 11th, reading from Antietam Shadows. So they already
Antietam
know,
Shadows.
Dennis, they're waiting for you. They're excited about that.
Yeah, the title itself ought to entice. Antietam Shadows, Mystery, Myth, and Machination.
It's a wonderful book, and I can't wait for you to read it to us, or at least read a portion to us. Let's see here. Let's see here. Seeing those high water marks by John Brown's Ford is really scary. Yeah, the flood images are frightening. And as we were playing those, we didn't note it at the time, but those of you who have seen the Harpers Ferry flood images, you know that those aren't all from the 1870 flood, which is what we were reading about this evening. The book covers a number of floods that have hit Harpers Ferry, and there are several, and we have many of those images, but 1870, very few images. Really
only one, I think, the one that we showed,
yeah.
The sketch
And
is the only one.
Those others, you know, as photography becomes more accessible to the general population, we get more and more images as time progresses. And
yeah, if you're interested in the floods, we devote quite a number of pages to the
yeah,
floods. We have a lot of illustrations.
We talk about
photographs. Those photographs are so powerful. We don't need a word to describe those.
Yeah.
So if you have a real interest in the floods, we cover that in detail in Confluence.
Yeah, not only the flood images, but also the impact of historic floods when the armory was in operation, and how factory operations were endangered, as well as the stores of the arsenals were endangered by flooding. So this is certainly an issue that Harpers Ferry knows well, and yes, it's always scary when we see the water climbing like that. Here's an interesting question. What significance does the Appalachian National Scenic Trail have in the park's history?
Oh boy, the Appalachian Trail. Yeah. Well, I love the Appalachian Trail.
Yes.
I spend a lot of time, especially during the pandemic, but even before in retirement, hiking the Appalachian Trail. And as a national park ranger, I got paid Appalachian Trail and Harpers Ferry and meet visitors hiking the Appalachian Trail. So the Appalachian Trail is a big part of me and my life. You know, AT for a long time did not come through Lower Town Harpers Ferry. It did not go the route that it does today. It did not go by Jefferson Rock. But it was rerouted when we got a bridge built, a pedestrian bridge built across the Potomac River. It was cantilevered to the Winchester-Potomac Railroad Bridge, and that provided safe passage from West Virginia to Maryland in the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. So that bridge opened in November of 1985. And with that, we were able to reroute the Appalachian Trail from Loudon Heights into Harpers Ferry along the trail that goes to Jefferson Rock. We used to call it the Cliff Trail, now the Appalachian Trail. And then on into the lower town, and then by the John Brown Fort and across the river on the pedestrian bridge. So it was a great reroute. I'll never forget. We opened it the 1st of November, 1985. By the end of the first week of November, 1985, we had to close that pedestrian bridge, and it was closed for months. Not because of poor construction. We had a terrible flood the first week of November, 1985. And suddenly the Appalachian Trail was cut off.
Wow. And we've kind of experienced a little bit of that lately as well. The bridge.
Yeah, this time due to a train derailment.
Yeah. But hopefully we will have that corrected soon so that we can all enjoy that easy access and be in that heart of the AT, as so many think of us here in Harpers Ferry.
And of course, for people that use the AT and know the AT, the national headquarters, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, is located here at Harpers Ferry. And I always thought that was great because I got to know people that work for the Conservancy, the nonprofit organization, the volunteers that support the Park Service and the upkeep, maintenance of the trail. And We did so many activities here, so many joint partnerships with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And so I will always have a very fond place in my heart for ATC and AT hikers. Always loved the through hikers that would come through. You could smell them coming usually.
Yes.
That was actually a bit of pride, because the longer they're out on the trail, they don't have an opportunity to bathe very often. And so we loved having the through hikers come through, those that are doing the whole thing. I spoke to, literally during my career at Harpers Ferry, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of through hikers. And it was so much fun to encourage them on their way as they were passing through Harpers Ferry.
I've always enjoyed chatting with them as well, working with the Park Association, people coming from so far away and resting for a while here with us in Harpers Ferry. It's one of the neat things about being in this place. Let's see here. You will be happy to know, Dennis, people are commenting they didn't know about some of the stories that we shared tonight.
Oh, good, good.
With the preservation battles and the KKK at the Niagara Commemoration.
You might remember that quote I had that's in the book, "Nothing happened here, boy. I was the boy." County commissioners were talking to me, and we were trying to convince them that something actually significant, like a battle, a big Civil War battle, in fact, the largest Civil War battle in the state of what becomes West Virginia during the war, happens on the ground that we're standing upon. And here I am with 5 county commissioners, and the president of the county commission tells me, "Nothing happened here, boy." We eventually won all those battles.
And we are all so grateful for that.
Had a lot of help, people from all over the country, local battlefield preservationist organizations like Friends of Harpers Ferry Park, the Harpers Ferry Conservancy, National Parks Conservation Association, American Battlefield Trust, National Trust for Historic Preservation. We truly became a national focus in these preservation battles. But our problem was we didn't just have one fight. We kept fighting. Year after year, we had to keep fighting. It just seemed endless. I'm surprised that we survived, but even better, the park survived, the park expanded, and we preserved that history.
Well, we are, as I said, we are all so immensely grateful for your work in that and the work of all of these other organizations and individuals who helped to give us this beautiful place that has provided such meaning for so many people through the years. So thank you.
We were inspired because it is their legacy we were working to protect and preserve. That inspired me every day I came into the national park.
Yes, indeed. I can see how Harpers Ferry would speak to you that way. I think that makes it through all of our questions. Dennis, any parting words before we go?
I think you'll find Confluence an experience. You'll experience your own confluence with Harpers Ferry.
That is absolutely our greatest hope for you, that you will find a story in this selection of stories that connects to your spirit, and you find your place in the confluence, just as we have each found ours. So with that, I think we'll say goodnight for this evening. We will be back next week. We will be leaving Harpers Ferry and traveling to the north to visit with Jeffrey Kramer of the Walden Woods Project and hear from his book about the friendship between Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's called Solid Seasons, and it's a fabulous book if you're a transcendentalist nerd like I am. Dennis will be back with us on June 11th, reading from Antietam Shadows. And as I said at the beginning, we have events planned all summer long, ranging across basically any genre you can imagine. Fiction, history, we're doing a mixology book that I'm kind of excited about. So please like the page, follow the page, and come check out what these authors have to share with you. It's so great to have something of our book people community back in this time of mass cancellation and closure. So thank you for sharing some of your evening with us tonight, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Good night.